few are new faces. If you are not on our forum email, we have little cards up front, and it tells you how to sign up. Then each week you get the email telling you what the program is. If you like it, you come. If you don't like it, you don't come. It's also available, thanks to Mr. Woody, online on YouTube, right, Will? The city's YouTube. So, and that's indicated on here as well. So, if you'd like to get on our email, come get the card at the end of the presentation. We are so pleased today to have Dr. Don Paulson. Don lives in Ouray and is curator of the Ouray County Historical Museum. He received his Bachelor of Science degree in chemistry from Monmouth College in Illinois, his doctorate in chemistry from Indiana University, and he retired from Cal State University, LA, where he was professor of chemistry after being a professor for 36 years. So he kind of changed things up a little bit as he moved to our area. He's the editor of the Ouray County Historical Society magazine, has written articles and given talks on Southwest Colorado, recently published images of the Southwest in photography and poetry with his wife Beth, has also published Mines, Miners, and much more, Peaks of the Uncompahgre and Narrow Gauge Railroading in the San Juan Triangle. And in 2019, he spoke at Forum on Mines, Miners, and much more. And in 2020, Roads That Changed the San Juan Triangle, Picks, Shovels, and Pioneers. If you're interested in any of those books, Don has a table as you came in. And it's my pleasure to introduce him to you today. Thank you, Don. We love having you.
Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be back here. As you'll find out, I love to talk, and I like to talk about southwestern Colorado. And so let's get started to talk about it. Today I'm going to talk about the naming of the peaks of the Uncompahgre. There are hundreds and hundreds of peaks over 13,000 feet all around us here, and many, many of them have names, and they have all kinds of exciting ways in which they were named. So let's get to that. First of all, let's say a few things about mountain names. Could we turn the lights down a little bit? Is there a way to do that? Anybody know?
Is it okay with you?
Well, sure, you'll look at it.
Yeah, that's good. Is that good? Yeah. All right, perfect. Okay, so let's say a little bit about mountain names first. First of all, mountains look very different from different vantage points. You can show a picture of a mountain and nobody will have any idea what it is because it's taken from a different perspective. Many mountains have two names. For example, in our area, Montrose and Fortress. There are numerous mountains with the same name. There are 3 Mount Baldies in Ouray County. There are 2 Mount Baldies in Gunnison County. So lots and lots of names. The United States Geological Survey has the official authority to name mountains. For example, Mount Sneffels. Dwight Lavender, who founded the Colorado Mountain Club, devised a naming system for mountains not named by the USGS. And we'll talk about S9, which is Sneffels Range Peak number 9, and T7, which is Telluride Area Peak number 7. Local names are adopted through common usage. One of my favorite is Corbett Peak, which my living room looks right on. Most mountains over 10,000 feet don't have names. The USGS is very stingy upon letting people name mountains. It's a really arduous task if you decide that you want to name a mountain. It has to go through the Colorado Historical Society, your county, the state, etc. So it's a difficult process to get a mountain named. Our mountain names come from early Spanish explorers, the Hayden and Wheeler geological surveys of the early 1870s, some by early settlers. The Colorado Mountain Club and the San Juan Mountaineers named a lot of our mountains. All the photos in this presentation are mine, unless otherwise indicated. Okay, there were 4 great Western surveys that carried on in the 1870s. I don't want to dwell on any of these too much. It's just to say that the King survey, who surveyed this area right here in the northern part of our area. We all know about John Wesley Powell, the first person to take a boat down the Colorado River. And Powell surveyed this area right here along the Green and Colorado. And then the one I want to talk about today is Ferdinand Hayden and George Wheeler. Hayden was a congressional survey from 1867 to 1878. And George Wheeler was a military surveyor, and he surveyed between 1872 and 1879. And the only thing I want you to notice is, well, here's Colorado. This green box is the Hayden survey area, and the big outer red line is what Wheeler surveyed. So Wheeler surveyed the whole area, not anywhere near exactly as well as the other surveys did. But the thing to notice is that they both, surveyed the same area. And that came a lot of confusion, a lot of jealousy, a lot of rivalry. They almost came to shooting each other in that particular thing. We'll say a little bit more later about how they conflicted on that. Okay, what we're going to talk about today is the Sneffels Range, which is right here. The Cimarrons, which is right over here. So here's Ridgway, here's Ouray. We're going to talk about peaks around Ouray, Yankee Boy Basin, Ironton. There's one of the Baldy peaks. The other 2 Baldies are over here. And so we're going to talk about the areas essentially between Ridgway and Ouray. Now, the Hayden survey, 1873 to 1875, were in Colorado. Most of the survey work was done in 1874, and these are the surveyors. So we have Frederick Endlick, who was the geologist, and this is Endlick standing right there. We had Franklin Rhoda, who's in the middle here. He was the assistant topographer and the half-brother of Wilson. And then we have Alan Wilson, who was the topographer, and that's him on the horse right here. 1874 picture. Now, this is the Sneffels Range, and I'm going to divide it into the East Sneffels and the West Sneffels. And one interesting thing about the Sneffels Range, it's one of the few mountain ranges in the whole United States that goes east to west. Most of our mountain ranges are north to south. And the Sneffels is an outlier on that, it being an east to west range. So here are some of the peaks we're going to talk about. There's Corbett, which my living room window looks on. And the next one is White House, right here. And then we have Ridgway Mountain right there. And then we have, this little one right here, which is called Reconnoiter or Buttercup. It's called Reconnoiter because when Dwight Lavender was thinking of climbing the north face of Sneffels, he stood at the base of this mountain and planned his route up Sneffels, and so he called it Reconnoiter. We also have Tea Kettle, and I don't know how many of you have driven on Highway 62 and looked up and said, how in the world did that mountain get named Tea Kettle? It absolutely does not look at all like a tea kettle. So we'll solve that mystery in a little bit. Then we have Cirque Mountain right here. And then this little tiny blip right there is called Kismet. And of course there's our signature peak, Mount Sneffels. And this little peak right here is called Blaine Peak. So let's delve into how those guys got their names. Corbett Peak. Miles Corbett was the superintendent of the Mineral Farms mine. He was the mayor of Ouray. He owned a grocery store in Ouray. He built a smelter on the north side of Ouray. He platted the Newsboy mine, president of the Ouray School Board, Ouray County Commissioner, a Mason. Corbett Creek is also named after him. Quite a prolific guy. And he provided some resources to Hayden when he went through the area, and that Hayden blessed him with calling that Corbett Peak. These two pictures right here are actually taken from my back porch. Here's a spring picture, or a fall picture, and a dead of winter picture. And here's Corbett from Highway 62. And you can see that this peak and that peak, they have no resemblance to each other at all. So if you just move 180 degrees, you get a very different perspective on those mountains. I discovered this just a couple of years ago. This is called the Corbett Cross. You see right here you have a cross. It's only visible about 3:30 to 4 p.m. because the shadow that is caused right here, those crevices are so shallow that the sun has to be right in the exact place. And I was driving down Highway 550 one day and I said, my God, what is that? And I found out that most of the local people knew about it, and it's called the Corbett Cross. The Sneffels Range. Here's White House right here. This is Corbett, and here's White House. This picture is taken from the Chief Ouray Trail above Ouray. And if you look at that, you go, yeah, well, why would anyone call that White House? And then if we look at a view from the Piedmont subdivision, here's Corbett. There's White House. Let's take a picture of what the White House looked in 1870 when this mountain was named. Doesn't look much like the White House. Here's a view from the north that even looks less like something that could be called the White House. But if you look at it from the Bridge of Heaven above Ouray, and the Bridge of Heaven was a route into Ouray before there was Highway 550 or even the trail. And so here is why it's called White House. There's the central portico, there's the west wing, and the east wing. So it's very reasonable that people climbing over that trail coming into Ouray would look and say, oh, gee, that does look like the White House. Mount Ridgway. It's named after Robert Ridgway, who was the construction superintendent for the north half of the Rio Grande Southern Railroad. And he also served as the superintendent of the DNRG, 1st and 2nd Divisions, Mount Ridgway. And here's a picture of it from Dallas Divide. This is Reconnoiter, named by Dwight Lavender because he had used the west base of the peak to study how he might climb Sneffels, which is over here. It's also known locally as Buttercup because it looks like that spring flower. There's Tea Kettle. Once again, how in the world would that get named Tea Kettle? Here's Surf Mountain. And this is Dwight Lavender. Here he is climbing Tea Kettle in the 1920s. He started climbing in the San Juan Mountains at age 16. He founded the San Juan Mountaineers. He wrote a definitive climbing guide to the San Juans in which he named a whole bunch of peaks. He named numerous San Juan mountain peaks. Unfortunately, he died at age 23 from polio. His brother, David Lavender, who many of you might know of, wrote a lot of books, One Man's West being the most famous of his books. He lived to be 98 years old. Okay, let's tackle Tea Kettle. So here's Tea Kettle as seen from Yankee Boy Basin. And here's Tea Kettle as seen from the Atlas Mine up in Governor Basin. Not a hint as to how that could have been called Tea Kettle. So let's delve into this. Well, first of all, it was named by Dwight Lavender. So here's Tea Kettle. And here's another view of Tea Kettle. Let's stand right here. Now I need to assure you that I never stood there. But let's stand right here and look at Tea Kettle. And this is what we see. Here, and that's what you're looking at. That little peak right there is that. Here is the handle, here's the kettle, and here's the spout. Now the spout used to come up a little higher and had a little hook on it. And during the winter of 1998, that fell off, that little hook. So that's why it's called Tea Kettle, because this little tiny part of it up here looks like a tea kettle. There are also some other little peaks up there. For example, this one right here, and that's called Coffee Pot because it resembles a coffee pot. And there's a picture of it. This is Coffee Pot, and it was named S1, Sneffels Range Peak #1, by David Lavender. Dwight Lavender. Okay, let's go on proceeding further on the Sneffels Range East. Here's Cirque Mountain. Cirque Mountain here, visible from the north side of Dallas Divide, and here from Governor Basin, and this is the Cirque. It's named for this shallow bowl on the south side. Cirque is a French word that means arena, describing an amphitheater or half bowl with steep sloping sides that leads to a flat bottom. And so this is the classical definition of a cirque. Now, Mount Sneffels. Of course, that's the signature peak around here. This is Mount Sneffels from the Keyhole high up in Governor Basin. And this is Mount Sneffels from Dallas Divide. And you can see not much resemblance except that they have a peak when you look from the north side and the south side. Now, how was it named? Frederick Endlich, who was the topographer for the Hayden Survey, while crossing the Blue Lakes Basin, one member of the party looked at the terrain and said, gee, that looks like the great hole in the earth described by Jules Verne in his Journey to the Center of the Earth. And Endlich replied, and there's Sneffels, referring to the stratovolcano near the hole. Jules Verne later changed his name to spell the name we have now, Sneffels, and Endlich, Alan Wilson, and Franklin Roller were the first to climb it in 1874. And Dwight Lavender was the first person to climb the north face of Mount Sneffels in the 1920s. Now, there is some controversy about really is that the way it was named. There's a story that it was a camper who had a cold and he had the sniffles and he named it Mount Sneffels. There's a couple other silly things. Endlich in 1898 wrote an article for the journal Appalachian. And in that article, he related how Sneffels was named. So that's 25 years after it was named, and he was an old man by then. And so it may or may not have been the story, but that's the one that we're stuck with, and we have lots of written communication about that. So that's Mount Sneffels. And this little tiny peak on the east side of Mount Sneffels is called Kismet. And Kismet is a Turkish word meaning fate or destiny. And I have no idea why anybody named that Kismet, but that's the official name for that little peak. Blaine Peak. Now, the Wheeler survey named Sneffels as Blaine Peak. Blaine was the Speaker of the House of Representatives, and both Hayden and Wheeler knew that the government was going to disband the 4 surveys and create the U.S. Geological Survey, which they did in 1879. And Wheeler wanted the USGS to be a military survey, and Hayden wanted it to be a congressional survey. And if you look at all of the names given to the mountains in the Sneffels Range, Wheeler named every one of them, and Hayden named every one of them, and the names we have today are Hayden's names. So you know immediately who won that battle. Now, Blaine Peak, although Wheeler named Sneffels Blaine Peak, we have today Blaine Basin, which is that beautiful wildflower basin in Ouray County, to the north side of the mountain. And this peak right here is named Blaine Peak, also in memory of Wheeler's name for the peak. And here's our view from Dallas Divide with Cirque, Blaine, and Sneffels. Okay. Now let's look at the west side of the Sneffels Range, and here are the peaks. Sneffels, the block tops, S4, that's Sneffels Range Peak 4, Wolcott Peak, Mears Peak, S7, S9, Hayden, and North Pole. Let's talk about their names. Okay, the block tops. Here is Sneffels, and there is Gilpin Peak, which is really more readily visible from the other side. And these formations right here are called the block tops, so named by Dwight Lavender. Dallas Peak, right here, named for George Mifflin Dallas. He was the U.S. Vice President from 1845 to 1849, and Dallas's nephew was the president of the National Academy of Sciences and a good friend of Hayden. And that's why Hayden named that peak Dallas Peak. Well, let's show which peak is Dallas Peak. Right there. That's Dallas Peak. Again, more readily seen from the Telluride side than from the Ouray side. Now, the old Dallas town site, Dallas Creek, Dallas Meadows, etc., also named. And there is a lot of controversy of where the name Dallas, Texas came from. And some people think it was named after George Mifflin Dallas, and other people have different ideas. So it's not exactly known where Dallas, Texas got its name, but it may have been named after the same guy. There's S4. There's Dallas Peak. And this picture was taken from the Telluride gondola. Wolcott Mountain. And Wolcott Mountain, whoops. Wolcott, oh, I don't have it. This is Wolcott Mountain right here. And this is the north face of the mountain as viewed from Dallas Alive. Wolcott was a U.S. Senator from Colorado and a corporate lawyer for the DNRG Railroad. He also invested in David Day's ill-fated attempt to end the DNRG Ouray branch at Portland. Portland is 5 miles north of Ouray, where my house is, and that's another interesting story of how the railroad got into Ouray and the shenanigans that went on between the investors and the town. Usually what railroads did is they said, you need to give us all of the land that we need for our terminal, for our station, for everything, and if you don't do that, we'll found a town 5 miles north of you. And so that was where Portland originally ranged from. And then the railroad double-crossed David Day. He was the publisher of a newspaper called the Solid Muldoon, very famous newspaper in the 1880s. And after that attempt, he was hounded out of town, moved to Durango, and founded the Durango Herald, which is still a going newspaper today. Another story. Mears Peak. So there, whoops, sorry. There we go. There's Mears Peak right there. And this is from the West Dallas Road, which goes to the south off of Highway 62. And this is the end of the West Dallas Road. It ends as this beautiful meadow, which is called the Box Factory. And the reason it's called the Box Factory is in Ridgeway, there was a box factory that made those boxes that fitted together like this. And they got their wood by lumbering some wood from this area, and so that ever since has been known as the Box Factory, because that's where the wood, where the boxes came from. Here's S9, Colorado Mountain Club nomenclature. Harry McClure had a ranch right here, just south of this peak, and Harry's brand was X over J. Look at that photo. Do you see the X over J? Here's the X, and here's the J. Only seen for a couple weeks in the fall and the spring. You get too much snow, and then you can't see the snow in the crevice, and you get not enough snow, and the crevice is black, and you don't see it. So it's a lucky time when you can actually go there and see the X over J. Hayden Peak, named for Ferdinand Hayden. We've been talking about Hayden. Here's S9 again. Now again here, now you can't see the X over J, there's too much snow. This is Hayden Peak right here. If I had been Hayden, I would have named myself after this mountain, not that little one over here. But at any rate, that's S9, that's Hayden Peak. And there's a picture of Ferdinand Hayden in 1874. And this little peak right here is called the North Pole. Have no idea who named it, but I've been able to trace newspaper articles back to about 1920 where that little peak is called the North Pole. Now, this is an interesting peak feature on the Sneffels Range. Here's S9, here's Hayden Peak, here's the North Pole. And there is the corpse, the head, the hands, the stomach, the feet. So there's the corpse on the Sneffels Range. Now let's move down toward Ouray. This is Cow Peak. It's sometimes called Cow Peak, Cow Benchmark. It's named for the Cow Creek drainage. So if you stand up here on the peak and look north, you can see Cow Creek and the drainage that is. It's named for the cow camp at the 2nd Los Pinos Indian Agency between here and Ridgway. And it was established where Cow Creek flows into the Uncompahgre, and that's where the cattle were raised because the U.S. had agreed to give the Utes so much cattle meat every year, of course, which they never did. They never did actually stand up to do what they said in all of the treaties they gave with the Utes. Anyway, this is a picture of cow from Twin Peaks, and here's the highway leading out of Ouray to the south. Here's the famous Bridge of Heaven, right here, and there's Cow Peak. So this picture is taken from Miller Mesa. It's actually, there's a wonderful new ski trail up on Miller Mesa, and this photo was taken from the end of that ski run. Okay, another peak around Ouray. Whoops, I gotta go back one. There we go. This is the amphitheater above Ouray. And this is the famous Cleopatra. Here's her head, her chest, her knee, and her feet. Now, how long ago was that named? I've done a lot of research into that, and this was the earliest one I could find. There was a postcard sent to Sergeant Orendorff from his mother, Cora, and this is what she said in the card. Dear Carol, Cleopatra has her green gown on at last. Only a white belt buckle is left of her winter gown. She was the Ouray County Superintendent of Schools for 20 years. Her husband ran the company stores at the Camp Bird and the Revenue. He also had stores in Ouray and Norwood. So another famous family in the mid-20th century in Ouray. Here's Cascade Mountain. It forms the north wall of the amphitheater. This is Cascade Mountain right here. In the early or late 19th century, this was not called the amphitheater, it was called the horseshoe. Here's an aerial photography. Here's Ouray. Here's the highway leading to the south. Notice the horseshoe. Now, I don't know how in the 1890s they got that picture until it looked like a horseshoe, but they figured out that it did look like a horseshoe. All right. This is the Bridge of Heaven, which I just mentioned. And here is the Bridge of Heaven. There's about a 1,000-foot drop this way. There's about an 800-foot drop this way. Here's a picture from 1910 with some horses on the Bridge of Heaven. And this is looking west, and Ouray is right down there. That's actually the road leading up Canyon Creek to the Camp Bird mine. Now, two signature peaks that you can see from Ouray. We have Twin Peaks and Sister Peak. Now, that's the name we have today, but names change. In the 1880s, it was called the Twin Brothers. And it was also called the Sister Peaks, after twins Letitia and Irma Giannino, and Sister Peak was possibly their younger sister, Pearl. So there's a Giannino family in Ouray that claims this was the two sisters, not the two brothers. The Rock of Ages, that rousing 19th century hymn, it's actually named after the Rock of Ages mine, which is named after the hymn. And the mine was right here. And there's Twin Peaks up there. Mount Abram. This is Ouray's signature peak. It looms over the town to the south, and anywhere on Main Street you get a wonderful view of Mount Abram. Now, you have to be careful about Mount Abram. It's not Mount Abrams. It's not named after a guy named Abrams. It's named after a guy named Abram Cutler. So that's a nice cocktail party piece. When somebody mentions Mount Abrams, you can say, no, it's Mount Abram, named after Abram Cutler. He was an early pioneer. He was the first judge in Ouray County. The Cutler Creek and the Cutler Geological Formation are also named after him. And we have evidence from the 1880s and 1890s that the original name was Mount Abram without the S. Pooh Bear Rock. This is one of my favorite mountains. There's Pooh Bear. There's his head, there's his feet. Pooh Bear just relaxing there. Here's another good shot of Pooh Bear. These pictures were all taken off my back porch looking to the southeast. And down here, in the 1920s, there was a big hardware store in Ouray called the Arps Brothers Hardware Store. There were 4 brothers named Arp, and one of them had a disfigured thumb. And so everybody called this Arp's thumb right there, the backside of Pooh Bear. And you can actually see, I'm sure you can't see it, but you can see here Arps Brothers Hardware, which was located in the ground floor of the Wright Opera House. And by the way, the Wright Opera House has never had an opera performed in it. You know, just another interesting fact that you can bring out at cocktail parties. Mount Hardin. Currently, this is the legal boundary that the city of Ouray uses as a reference point. So this is Mount Hardin right here, and here's Mount Abram. We don't know who it's named for, but it could be Neil Hardin, who was one of the original locators of the city of Ouray in 1875. Now, this is an article from the Plain Dealer of Ouray in 1903. There's Mount Abram, and there's Mount Hardin. And I know you can't read this, so I'll read it for you. For 4 miles below Ouray is a most beautiful drive along the side of the raging Uncompahgre. The young people have named it. In the distance through the trees, to the right is Mount Abram, and to the left is Mount Hardin. But the earliest reference I have to that being called Mount Hardin. Now, some peaks around Ouray. Hayden Mountain, of course, named for Ferdinand Hayden, the director of his survey. And it's not to be confused with Mount Hayden, which is in the Sneffels Range. It's the massive ridge that separates Canyon Creek, the road that goes to the Campbird Mine, from the Ironton Valley 550. And so here we have some pictures. It's almost like they got tired of naming things, so they named the whole ridge Hayden Mountain. There's no names for all the little peaks along it. There's another view of it, another view from downtown Ouray, another view from a 1920s postcard, picture taken from the grassy knoll near the start of the Horsethief Trail. So that's Hayden Mountain. Some other peaks. Here's Baldy. If you drive south from Ridgeway on your way to Ouray and you look up there, you go, gee, why in the world did they call that Baldy? Mount Baldy. Well, here's a picture from the Baldy Trail. Here's the trail that eventually leads to the top of Baldy. So if you look at the south side, you can see why it was called Baldy, but the north side is heavily treed. And this is the view of the Sneffels Range from the top of the Mount Baldy summit. Okay, some other peaks. There are numerous Baldies, as I mentioned a little ago. There's South Baldy. By the way, this is taken from that new ski run on Miller Mesa. So we have South Baldy right here. We have West Baldy right here. This is Highway 62 right here. And then we have Baldy west of the Gunnison River in Gunnison County. Now, some early maps show Baldy as East Baldy. And so this is actually a dinner plate from the 1976 centennial issue of the Plain Dealer. This is the Village Diner, and you can see they have West Baldy, South Baldy, and they call our Baldy in that East Baldy to kind of put some symmetry to it. Okay, Horsefly Peak. It was named by freighters on the Dave Wood Road for its resemblance to a fly, and I must have the wrong perspective here because I've never been able to figure out why that looks like a fly. It's also called Mosca Peak, which is Spanish for fly. And local residents who can see this peak from Ridgeway, they say that the spring winds will not stop until the last snow has melted from Horsefly Peak. So if you want those winds to stop, just keep an eye on Horsefly and see when the snow's gone. This is one of my favorite peaks. This is the Angel. And you can see the Angel right here. It's a brilliant white rock at the head of Angel Creek. It's located about a mile west of Ouray on the north side of the canyon. You have to get the picture around noon because at any other time the sun isn't shining on this peak and you can't see it. But once that sun is on it, there was a brilliant white peak, which looks a little bit like what you might anticipate an angel would look like. Here's United States Mountain right here. It is named for the U.S. Depository Mine, which is right here, which was worked by Tom Walsh, one of his peaks, one of his mines. It's also visible from Flynn Park in Ouray. It's the only Sneffels Peak visible from Ouray, and there it is on the Camp Bird Road. There's the depository mine. There's U.S. Mountain. There's Potosi, and there's the Camp Bird Level 3. This is a rock glacier. Rock glaciers are really neat things. They're very thick, and they probably have ice underneath them. And a rock glacier is slowly moving down the hill on that ice base that it has. And they're very rare, and there are 4 or 5 of them in Ouray County. And there we go. Okay, here's a drawing of the rock glacier. This is the 1899 level 3 portal of the Camp Bird Mine, which has been covered over by the glacier as it moves down. Here's the 1987 portal, and it won't be too long before the glacier overtakes that as well. The center moves about 12 inches a year, and the edges move much less than that. And so you can see the 1899 portal is gone, and soon to be the 1987 portal as well. Here's Chicago Peak, right here. That's Sneffels. This little knob right here is Chicago Peak. It's named after the Chicago Tunnel Mine, which is in the area, and one of its adits is actually shown in the photo. This photo was taken from Fort Peabody, and we'll talk about that in a second. So this is Imogene Pass. We have Dallas Peak, Gilpin Peak, Mount Emma, Mount Sneffels, Cirque, and T-Kettle. Now, Fort Peabody, named for Governor Peabody, who sided with the mine owners during the 1902-1904 labor unrest in the Telluride mines. The Colorado National Guard was called out to quell the violence by Governor Peabody, and to show where his feelings lay, he put the National Guard under the charge of Bulkley Wells, who was the manager of the Tomboy mine. So we have a manager of one of the mines coming in to settle the argument between the laborers and the mine owners. They built this up there on the top of Imogene. This was where the men lived. This was a machine gun nest because they were afraid that the miners would come from Ouray over Imogene Pass back into Telluride, because Ouray was very sympathetic to the miners and Telluride was not. This is what it looked like in 1950. This is what it looked like in 2007. And in 2010, the San Miguel County Parks Department rebuilt it, and you can see they use a lot of the original wood in there. Now, Stony Mountain, named because it looks like a stone mountain right here, all dark stone. It sits between Governor Basin, which is right here, and Yankee Boy Basin, which is on the other side. We have Gilpin Peak right here. We have Mount Sneffels, and then we have Cirque over here. Now, Mount Emma, right here, probably named for Emma Hayden, who was the wife of Ferdinand Hayden. He was director of the survey, as we said, in the 1870s, and he and Emma were married in 1871. It's also called the Virginia Peak, after the Virginius mine. There's Gilpin. Okay, we have a lot of basins in Ouray County. Basins are actually very commonly named in the San Juans, but not elsewhere. So the basins are often named for mines, type of ore, prospectors. We have Governor Basin, which is named after an ore vein. Yankee Boy Basin, named after the Yankee Boy mine. Silver Lake Basin, named after Silver Lake. Richmond Basin, named after the Richmond mine. Imogene Basin, named after the wife of prospector Andy Richardson. And Sydney Basin, named after the Sydney mine. Porphyry Basin, named after a type of gold ore. So lots of basin names in Ouray County. Okay, the peaks west of Ouray. This is Mendota Peak, looking from Governor Basin, looking south. This is Mendota Peak from Marshall Basin, looking north. Now, Mendota, there are at least 6 Midwestern states that have towns named Mendota. It's a Lakota Indian word meaning the junction of 2 trails. Now, the Geological Survey also identifies it as Mendoza Peak, with Mendota as an alternate name. We have no idea where Mendoza came from. It might be Anglos mispronouncing Mendota. Don't know how that came about. But the USGS likes Mendoza. People around here call it Mendota. Now, there's 2 other features here. This is the Keyhole Pass, right here, looking from the north side, looking from the south side. This was a trail that connected Ouray with Telluride. So in the winter, crazy people from the Campbird mine would walk over the Keyhole Pass down into Telluride. Very crazy thing to do in the icy winter. Okay, the Keyhole Pass, here it is in 1890 with Mount Sneffels peeking through there. Here it is in 2021, taken from the same vantage point. Here it is in 1890 with a surveyor. And here it is with a couple of crazy people in 2008. First time I climbed up there, it's quite a hike, but the view is just unbelievable, looking south toward Telluride and looking north toward Ouray. Now, some peaks west of Ouray. We have Potosi Peak, named by the Hayden Survey, and it's either named for the silver mining town in Bolivia or one in Mexico. Now, how do you pronounce it? If you want to be named after the one in Bolivia, it's pronounced Potosi. If you want it to be the one in Mexico, it's called Potosi. We don't really know which it was named after, but it was clearly one of those 2. And of course, Yankee Boy Basin, wonderful wildflower area. And the word comes from the Quechua Indian language, which means great wealth, which is good for a silver mining town. The Wheeler Survey named it Frustum Peak. This is a geometrical figure, a flat-topped pyramid. And you can see that this does look here like a flat-topped pyramid. But of course the name today is Hayden's name, not Wheeler's name. Peaks west of Ouray, the St. Sophia Ridge, right here, named for St. Sophia, a Roman martyr, and the wonderful boarding house of the Mountaintop Mine. Probably a number of you have been up in Governor Basin and seen the mountaintop. I don't know if you're aware of this, but that wonderful boarding house collapsed in the winter of 2021. And there is a little picture of it down here, and it's collapsed. So it fell this way in winter of 2021. This little notch right here is called Virginius Gap, after the Virginius mine, and it was used by surveyors as a reference point in the 1880s and 1890s. Brown Mountain. Brown Mountain is actually a ridge right here. This is Duco, which means duo counties. That's where Ouray County and San Miguel County come together. And this is Mount Abram. This was taken from California Platte Pass. This is Lake Como, which is the headwaters of the Uncompahgre River. Let's move over and climb up Mount Hayden and look. And here's Mount Abram, here's Brown Mountain, and here's Duco. Now, it could be named because it's brown in color, but it might also be named by one of the many, many Browns who were settlers in the 1870s and 1880s. We don't really know for sure. But a likely candidate is George Brown, who served as a member of the town council, a county trustee. He also served as the Ouray County coroner in 1880. Red Mountain, very famous from Highway 550. If you climb up on Hayden Mountain and look to your south, you can see Red Mountain 1, Red Mountain 2, Red Mountain 3. They're actually just ridges. They're not peaks, actually. And you get a good view of that from up on those hillsides. And this is Red Mountain number 1 from Great Copper Gulch, the east side of Red Mountain 1. So to take this picture, you're standing right about here. And there's a beautiful little tarn in front of that. Okay, peak south of Ouray. Hayden Mountain has a lot of little knobs on it, and the winter skiers actually have given names to these. This is called the King and Three Queens. It's not very visible from there, but let's get up on the Corkscrew Pass Jeep Road, and here's the King and the Three Queens. Trico Peak. I always wanted this beautiful little knob right here to be Trico Peak, but it's not. It's this flat peak right here. And it's called Trico. When I first came here, I was pronouncing it Trico, and people said, no, it's Tri-County. It's where Ouray County, San Juan County, and San Miguel County come together. And if you take the Black Bear Pass is just to the back side of this peak right here. Bear Mountain. Here's a picture from 1890, William Henry Jackson. There's Bear Mountain. The bear right there is eating an ice cream cone. And you can see 120 years later, he's still eating his ice cream cone. It's amazing that there hasn't been a fire or something else that would have dislodged that. But it looks just like it did 120 years ago. Now, the Cimarron Range, the last range that we're going to talk about. We have Cimarron Ridge, Turret Ridge, Chimney Rock, Courthouse, Precipice, Montrose, and Red Cliff. Jeff Birch, the co-author of my book, the book that we wrote on the peaks, he has a friend, and they were driving down to Ouray, and the guy said, well, what's the name of that mountain over there? And Jeff said, it's Precipice. And the guy said, well, yeah, it's a precipice, but what's its name? And anyway, it is named Precipice. Okay, here are the peaks we're going to talk about. Darley Mountain, Darley Garden, Dexter Peak, more peaks over here. So Ouray is here, Ridgeway is up there. Okay, there are a lot of ridges there. This is the west fork of the Cimarron River. This is the middle fork, and the east fork is right over here just off the picture. So let's take a look at some of these ridges. This is the Dyke Ridge, and Dyke Ridge is right here. And there's Precipice taken from the other side. Here's Pinnacle Ridge, and Pinnacle Ridge is right here. And then there's Turret Ridge, and Turret Ridge is right there. And the final ridge is Cimarron Ridge, which is the one that you can see from Highway 550 as you're going south from Montrose. Engineer Mountain. We don't know who named it. This is Engineer Pass Road right here. This is taken from a place known as Odom Point, and there is Engineer Mountain. Now, you don't want to confuse that with the much more famous peak, which is south of Silverton. Engineer looks like an anvil. And this was named by Lieutenant Ruffner, the leader of the 1873 Ute Reconnaissance Mission. That mission was set out to see if the miners were obeying the law that they couldn't mine in that particular area. And of course they weren't obeying it, and so what Ruffner did is said, yep, they're not obeying it, and they never did anything about it. At any rate, that mountain that you see prominently as you drive north from Durango is Engineer Mountain. Okay. Darley Mountain. George Darley was a Presbyterian minister. He built the church in Ouray. He built the church in Lake City. And he traveled back and forth in the winter between Ridgeway and Lake City over Engineer Pass. Just crazy. He did it on what was then called snowshoes. and those were 10-foot-long wooden skis. And so this is Darley Mountain, taken from the top of Engineer Pass, looking to the north. And he wrote a book about his experiences. That's really a great read. It's just amazing what those guys endured to bring religion to the San Juans. Darley Varden Mountain, and here's Darley Varden Mountain, nice colorful hoop skirt. Darley Varden was a character in Charles Dickens' novel Barnaby Rudge, and it was also a popular dress, and you can see some of the pictures of the dress and see where they got the name from. Dexter Mountain, named for James Dexter. He was a famous Leadville mine owner who also had several claims on Dexter Creek, including the Calliope and the Dexter. Here's a picture from the Horse Thief Trail. It doesn't look very interesting from there, but that's Dexter Mountain. And if you take the Dexter Creek Trail, there's Dexter Mountain. Wild Horse Peak. It's really a lovely peak. Just after you get the peak of Engineer Pass and you drive down toward Lake City, you see that on your left. It was named by Grafton Rogers, who was the founder of the Colorado Mountain Club. And to some people, it looks like a horse rearing its head up in the air. Here's Uncompahgre Peak. Here's Wetterhorn Peak. Wetterhorn, named after an Austrian mountain that supposedly looks like our Wetterhorn. And here we have Matterhorn, which is a 13er, Wetterhorn, which is a 14er. There's Potosi. Whoops, there's Potosi, by the way. There's Sneffels. This picture was taken from the summit of Uncompahgre. So Uncompahgre is a word in the Ute language which possibly means hot water spring, naming the springs in the city of Ouray. And the spelling is kind of interesting because most of the 19th century maps spell it Uncompahgre instead of the spelling that we have now, Uncompahgre. So when you hear people talk about Uncompahgre, they very often pronounce it Uncompadre, but it's not named after a Catholic Spanish priest. It's named after a Ute Indian word. Cimarron Range, here we go. Coxcomb resembles a rooster's comb or a cap worn by court jesters in the Middle Ages. Here's Red Cliff. This is the red cliff of Red Cliff, and after it rains, that is just a shining bright red. Here's some more peaks. This is called either U3 for Uncompahgre 3, or Fortress, or Montrose. It was named by Joe Seelig, who was one of the founders of Montrose, and it is named after Sir Walter Scott's site in his book, The Legend of Montrose. And by the way, if you're an old-timer here, you know that the town is not Montrose, it's Montrose, the way that would have been pronounced by Walter Scott. So here's Courthouse, resembling a Midwestern courthouse building. Here's Precipice, with the big precipice right there. There's Montrose Peak. Precipice, of course, named for the drop-off. We have Dunsinane Peak right here, named after Macbeth's castle in the Shakespearean play. No idea how they figured out that's what the castle looked like, but there it is, Dunsinane. There's Precipice, there's Montrose, there's Red Cliff, the backside of Red Cliff, not where the red is, and there's Coxcomb, and this picture was taken from the top of Uncompahgre Peak. So we have Courthouse over here, resembles a typical Midwestern County courthouse building. We have Chimney Peak, obviously like a tall chimney. We have Steely Mountain. There's Precipice, there's Courthouse, there's Chimney. This is Steely Mountain right here. The Steely family had a large ranch in this area here. named for Patricio Seeley and his son Juan. Juan was a great rodeo performer, a very famous person in Ouray County. The Steele family owned, since the 1880s, have owned this land to the west of the peak. There's another peak here. This is Sneva Mountain. It's really hard to see. That's Sneva Mountain. And it's named for the Sneva brothers, Anders, Andrew, Theo, and Halvar, who emigrated from Norway in the 1880s, and they owned land to the west of that mountain peak. And this photo was taken from the Owl Creek Pass Road east of Ridgeway. Storm King Peak. Storm King is the northernmost peak in the Cimarron Range. It's probably named for the violent summer thunderstorms that frequent its summit. And people in Montrose would say that the spring winds will not end until the 7 on the end of Storm King is free of snow. Well, where's that 7? There it is, right there. That's taken from the city market parking lot in Montrose. And when that 7 has no more snow, the winds are going to stop in Montrose. Okay, you can't put something like this together without having a lot of people help you. And Jeff Birch, the co-author of the book that we wrote, Jeff is a professional photographer. There are 2 or 3 of my pictures in the book, but almost all the pictures are Jeff's, and almost all the words are mine. So it's a collaboration between a historian and a photographer. Bill Heyman, who was able to procure for me a copy of Dwight Lavender's book about naming the peaks in the San Juans. Alan Nossaman, the late curator of the San Juan County Historical Society, has written 3 monumental books called Routes into Silverton, Volume 1, 2, and 3. The Ouray County Historical Society pictures. Gail Saunders, our photo curator, is hiding back there. I owe Gail a lot for the photos that she had, the information that she has. The San Juan County Historical Society has wonderful archives. The Ouray Public Library has also some archives. And my wife, Beth, who puts up with all of the meanderings that I do to try this information. And I want to thank you folks for coming. And I've also brought with me 3 books that I published. This is Images of the Mountain West. Has Beth's poetry. Beth, by the way, is the poet laureate of Ouray County. And so this book is Beth's poems paired with my photos, 50 of each. This is the book that Jeff and I wrote about the naming of the peaks. So it has everything I said today plus a lot more. And then my final book that I brought is Mines, Miners, and Much More. And this talks about the mining in Silverton, Ouray, and Telluride, the so-called San Juan Triangle. This book is $20. That book is $40, and this book is $25. And I want to thank you for coming today. I certainly enjoyed it. I hope you did.